Ladies and gentlemen, man, it was a crazy day today, but here we are. My name is Eddie Phillips. Here we are for the Erudition Network for our Thursday interactive program. Hey, I apologize to everyone who, we had a slight delay, and I just want to make sure that I was able to get on today. Had a little bit of a first snow here in Colorado, so that caused a little bit of issue. And I don't know if you all know this, but I travel about an hour back and forth. So it was kind of crazy today getting in. But I am here, and we are live. I see I got about 3 people that signed in. Hey, please feel free to share the broadcast and let folks know that we started a little bit late today, but we are on. Ladies and gentlemen, I have no idea. I'm probably going to say this several times today during the broadcast. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. And usually I have a pretty good idea of where I'm going to go with the show. But unfortunately today, that is not the case. So what does that do for us? That opens us up to the ability to have, hey, Daniel, hey, good to see you. To ask questions, to put things out here, to have a discussion. I got on today as I was racing to get in there. I was like, man, what am I going to discuss? There is so much that is going on in the world right now that can be talked about and given a historical spin or perspective on. But today, I really just didn't know. Last week we had a really great show. We got on and we talked about Columbus. And if you know me, I love talking about Western civilization history. And I use that term because that is what they call it, right? Western civilization. No matter what they call your kids' school books, Journey into Freedom, Finding Freedom, The Neverland of Freedom, whatever they call it, in the end of the day, we're teaching Western civilization. And I thought I did a pretty good job last week. Sorry, I'm trying to move some of my stuff out of my way here because you don't see this, but usually my desk is a mess because I have so many books. I keep a FDR desk. And if you don't know about FDR, FDR's desk was horrible. It was probably a record as one of the most messy presidential desks of all time, but apparently he knew everything was. I know everything is, but I have so many books and different things. But getting into the show today, I don't know what you all may want to talk about. The couple of people that we have on here, feel free to ask questions. I'm actually going to share or send something out right now to let people know that we are live. We are live, so that they can get on and start asking questions. I'm going to let you all kind of drive today. We're about 10-15 minutes late getting on today, but and as I said at the very beginning, we had a little bit of a touch of snow here in Denver, so kind of delayed me getting in that hour drive that I take to get in here on Thursdays. But I'm here and I'm open to whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to do. So if you have a question, you have something that you want to talk about, feel free to ask that question. Dang, I see you say you're doing homework. That's good. That's good. It's a matter of being a little bit of slow and just bring questions, say whatever. I guess until anyone just tries to talk about a topic, let's touch on some current events. Recently, hey brother, how you doing? Hey Ty, yeah, that's my brother right there. My Navy brother, my soul brother. I'm so happy that you're on here. I got your messages. And I appreciate you, brother. If someone flies a blue like matter flag, blue lives matter, are they racist? Okay, No, they're not. But it's funny that you asked that question, because earlier today on my page, hey Tracy, there's another other brother, other Navy brother. Hey, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you coming on and interacting. Um, but getting into what you were saying, Daniel, no, you can support the police. You can support the police, and you can. I have friends who are police officers. I know folks who are police officers. There's nothing wrong with that. What the issue comes down to is when you malign or you take away from things that you see, right? Things that you know that are wrong. And I think rather, regardless of your political affiliation or your belief systems, religious or otherwise, there should always be some kind of empathy or compassion for people, right? And what they're going through. If you see bad cops doing bad things, it should, your politics, beliefs, whatever, religious beliefs should have nothing to do with you saying, hey, what that person did was wrong. So, no, I don't consider anyone who's saying that Blue Lives Matter as a racist. I think that that's painting people with a broad brush, and that would be wrong, right? That would be wrong. But I said earlier that was an interesting thing to talk about because I know on my personal page, and yes, I do have a personal page outside of Erudition. I talked about earlier today. I had posted a post, and just like kind of what Daniel is saying, some people sent me messages, and it's so funny to me because I tell people all the time, and I don't put people on blast, but folks send me messages, right? They send me things privately, right? Exactly. Tracy said, only wrong if you use as a rebuttal to BLM. I agree with you 100%. If you're saying something just to rebut, then you probably are already wrong and you knew it, right? You're not empathizing with what people are going through. But I'm going to, I like to share my screen, but I'm going to share this screen share of a picture that I added in one of my posts today. And so I posted this, right? Shame of America. This is an NAACP poster from back in the 1920s, right? And if you look closely, I don't know if you can really see it so much, but if you look closely here, I don't know if it'll make it out. They're talking about several things that were going on with the dire anti-lynch bill at the time. Where they were trying, me and Tyson had talked about this years ago, trying to pass the laws to federally outlaw lynching. And if you look up at the top of this, you see kind of like numbers, right? If you can't make it out, it says alleged crimes, 1,288, rape, 871. And they go on down why some Bob's victims died, and because they were a member of a political group, jumping a labor contract, and different reasons why folks got killed. And I wanted to state this because I kind of talk about Blue Lives Matter when I sent blue policemen and how this country turned a blind eye to lynching for hundreds of years, and justified it, whether it was white, black, but blacks got the most egregious treatment in lynching. But Asians, Indians, Native Americans, people were lynched also. So when you ask that question, and as Tracy said, we can't rebut with the idea that, oh, well, it's because, we want to rebut Black Lives Matter. Tyson said, I had a Karen in the wild. I always wear a fancy suit out. I was at a new casino. She was angry that I didn't help her after repeating, I don't work here. She said, I look like management. Is it progress? Well, look, at least she thought you were a manager, At least she thought you were a manager, man. at least she felt like, you were somebody that in authority, right? So I guess that's a step, right? She didn't come up there think you were just some regular worker sitting around doing nothing. So, uh, yes, they were shot down more than 200 times, unfairly. And it was white and black uh, politicians who tried to get lynching listed as a crime, as a federal crime. So understand that it's not everybody. Many people wanted to fight against this. My nephew, hey, how you doing? What does Black history have to do with black men have the lowest life expectancy? So let's unpack that question. What does Black history have to do with black men having the lowest life expectancy? Well, one of the things that I will tell you about Black history, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is that criminality. So history plays a part in perception, and we've talked about that many times on this program interactively, that history plays a part in perception, right? If you don't know a part of your history, or you accept a revisioned, fallacious, sophistry type part of history, then you will go down in the idea that whatever was said was true. A couple of weeks ago, I had shared a man who was well known, in history. And I'm sorry, I pull up his picture. Walter Wilcox. Walter Wilcox was a statistician. He was a man who spent the better part of 60 years creating stats that were wrong, and many people who are in the know have written about how Walter F. Wilcox's studies were wrong. They were racist. They were bigoted. They were assumptive based on bigotry. But we still use Walter Wilcox's statistics. We still use his information. And so what happens is, because Walter Wilcox was one of the first people, right, before the Monahan Report and everything else, who said that black men were violent, black people were criminalized, right? He was one of those people that believed that. And he would go around and juke up the ideas of the statistics coming out of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And so we still use those when we go back in the day. And so how does that mess with our life expectancy? If you are being told or conditioned from a time, both in education and community interaction, that you are less than, you are secondary, and you don't really know your history or where you come from, right? Or the fact of how some of these things are lies, you will find yourselves in traps, right? You will find yourself lost in the idea that I'm nothing. So that cuts down on life expectancy, right? Because now you're getting involved with criminal activity based on this idea that that's what's expected from you. The other part of that is how people perceive you. Now, black men have one of the lowest, babies have some of the lowest post-birth rate statistics, right? Still in this country. And they've led that for the better part of 70 years. So that means that when black men are born, black boys are born, there is already a percentage of them who are expected not to make it. And there are things that are done that affect that also. But that's a good question. Should I talk to my principal about the lack of diversity in my class at a school itself? You can ask and petition anyone to, or what you feel that you can present to push the idea of diversity, a different understanding, right? When I was in high school years upon years ago, I wrote several papers, and I was not considered to be the greatest student in the world. But one of the things that I did was I made sure that I shared my writing with teachers, with the school establishment. And so when ceremonies were held, Black History ceremonies and things like that, they would ask me, hey, Eddie, could you recite or go and share what it is that you wrote? And so that allowed people to do was to see and understand some history and some things that we weren't being taught, that weren't being taught to us in the curriculum, things that weren't being said to us generally. Because you have to understand that the schools have a curriculum. Tracy is on here. He's a teacher. They have a curriculum. They follow that curriculum. The teachers do their best, a lot of them, to try to get you to be inspired to do things differently. I don't think that anybody would tell you, I should say they shouldn't tell you that, don't talk about diversity. They should encourage you. So if you feel that you want to talk about diversity, write something, share it, talk to those who in the administration, and maybe, like I just said, they will make a way for you to share something, and then that will inspire others to do the same. I want to pull up this thing about Walter Wilcox because now y'all got me interested. I didn't have it prepared, so you have to forgive me. But keep on asking your questions while I'm doing that. Keep on asking your questions while you're doing that. Nothing. Nada. And I agree. I agree with you, brother. Most curriculums do mandate diversity now, and they're pushing more for it. And let's understand, too, everybody does not live in this bubble of oppression. People are out here, multiple different cultures, different backgrounds, who are trying to open up discussion. How will the anti-abortion law affect people of color? In what way? I mean, and I don't think that it will affect them any more than it will affect other cultures. I don't think that there's a color contingency to anti-abortion laws. I think that people are going to, and history suggests it, find a way to work around whatever unjust laws or because there is a such thing as an unjust law, right? To be able to do what they want to do. Unfortunately, what we really want in this country is to try to legalize some women's ability to control their own bodies. In the same way, you wouldn't want anybody to control your way of your body, right? Now, rather, wherever you fall in the political lineage or religious belief, at that, it still comes down to an individual's choice. Why do I say that? Because if an individual wants to do something, even with your own life, they're going to do it, right? So, and try to find a way to do it. Tyson said, Daniels, well, I don't believe that the Blue Lives Matter flags make a person racist. It takes me to radiation. Not all radioactive materials is nuclear, but all nuclear materials are radioactive. Great statement. Absolutely true. Tracy. Even here in Texas, a lot of topics that people think are controversial are actually are mandated curriculum. And people argue over the idea of a mandated curriculum. That's really what people feel like they need to have control. And you should have interaction on what's happening. But what always gets me, and what I try to do with this program, is that whatever you don't get in school can be gotten outside of school. All you have to do is look for it. If you don't believe that, go and look on YouTube and go pull up how many tutorials will tell you how to put a faucet in a kitchen sink. Now, Tracy, me, and others on here, I don't know that. We come from Alexa wanted to get involved. We come from a background where you didn't used to be able to get on and say, hey, blah, 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 Alexa or Google or whatever, what is this? You had to go out and find it, right? Go to the thing called a library, or have your mom and dad, maybe they went and got those old dusted off encyclopedias, right? You had to go research it. Even a dictionary. You couldn't just ask, how is this word spelled? You had to go actively look it up in alphabetical order and go find what you were looking for. So we're in a different society now where you can find information, then you have to be smart enough to vet that information once you get into it. Sean Anthony, seeing how history has told black people that police officers have often been the enforcers of racism by keeping black people in their own towns and allowing white people to go into those towns and beat them, does that mean that most cops are racist and lawbreakers? And can they be trusted because of their past transgressions? Wow. I'm sorry about that phone ringing. This is my son. This is a really, really good question, right? A really thoughtful question, because we have had that. We have had this situation where whites went into towns, and they were allowed. They were allowed. You know, that article, or that, maybe I'll share it on Erudition. I don't think I shared it today. But the thing that I just showed you with the lynching thing, I kind of went into the history of that, right? And talked about that. But you ask, does that mean that most cops are racist and lawbreakers, and can they be trusted because of their past transgressions? I don't believe, I've never believed that a person is irretrievably racist. People argue with me about that. But I don't believe that a person, just as you learned racist, bigoted, implicit, biased thinking, because I understand psychology. Just because you learned it doesn't mean that you can't unlearn it. As a matter of fact, I would often tell people that the person who is raised and steeped in these racist backgrounds and seeing these things and has allowed it, right? I think that as they get older or they move outside of it, we saw it. My brothers on here from the Navy will tell you, when you are put in a position where you have to work with people from different cultures and backgrounds and nationalities, you find that you have more in common than you have uncommon. And so what you wind up doing is saying, man, all these things I believed are crap. But you have something else that other people don't have. You have a reference. You have a reference so that when you come up with next to a bigoted person who says something ignorant, salacious, or bigoted, you can go and say, hey, that ain't right. That's not right. And you can argue with them in their mindset. And you can tell them, because you can understand that they can get out of that mindset. So I don't think that we should say that they can't be trusted. But I do think that you need to be aware that there are folks out here who are bigoted in every profession and every avenue of life, whether they be police officers or whatever. And so when we talk about the idea of Blue Lives Matter, right, you're painting everything with a broad brush on the other side too. Because you have to also, you can say that. And there's truth to that. People go out to defend our neighborhoods and protect us. But at the same time, that's a trust that we give them. And when they violate that trust, you should be just as open and honest to tell them you have violated that trust. You should have gotten this person off the force. Good question, Sean Anthony. Hope I answered some of it. If I didn't, you could ask more. Tyson, I kind of agree, but there are many people flying that flag. Yes. And this is what we're talking about. You know, when we go back and we look at the Confederacy, right? And we look at the Confederate flag, and we remember that that coming out of the Civil War and the Confederates, we remember that the flags that they had, because they had many flags, right? Many flags. And that's an interesting history to go into, and maybe one day we will do a show, and I won't go too far into that. But there were many, many flags that the Confederates used, right? But we look at that adapted, changed flag, and we see that people were flying that. But then we never asked, when did they fly, right? Because at the end of the Civil War, they were told that this is over. They had to repledge themselves back to the Union. And they were told to bury that flag. Lee told them to take it and bury it, put it away. We are all one country again. But what wound up happening is that coming into the 40s and the 50s, where we had Brown versus the Board of Education, where we had the civil rights movement happening in Montgomery, and we saw the Birmingham Boys boycotts, and we saw all of this stuff. They pulled them flags back out as a symbol to be against civil rights. People like Strom Thurmond stood up in front. We forget that one of the first marches on Washington, Strom Thurmond, white people, stood up there and told people, right? They were flying those Dixie flags. We have to understand that people will use symbolism to garner followership. That's anywhere. That happens even with our national flag. It's a sign of patriotism, a sign of we're with that. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, except when you're using it to oppress others, to minimize others, to create an argument, or to use it as a straw man argument in order to deride and push people away from the point, a valid point that they're making. Great question. Oh, and then we got right into it. Does U.S. nationalism cause bigotry? No. Why do I say that? Some of the most patriotic people in the history of this country, the Tuskegee Airmen, the Harlem Fighting Hellcats, right? The 54th Massachusetts. These black men in Massachusetts, former slaves, were very, 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 very patriotic. And they gave their lives for the belief, for the promise of American freedom. So historically, we can't say that the nationalism, the idea of flying that flag or believing in your country causes bigotry, because we can see other sides of that. We have people in this country. I often say that a lot of black servicemen who served in World War I, II, and the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, they gave their lives for a promise, for a belief. They trusted in the idea that America was worth it. It was greater than what was being shown. That the idea of freedom was worth dying for. So I do not believe that nationalism can lead you to bigotry. No, I'm not saying we're old. Right on. Hey, Cuzzo, thank you for being on. I know this is a hard day for us. If you don't know, today was funeral for my last great aunt, and it was hard. It's been hard for me to kind of deal with, but I appreciate you being on here, Cuzzo. Appreciate it. Dave, for this my fault. I don't know how to tag on. Yeah, I'm learning it every day, man. Many of them are also scared of repercussions against themselves because of the times and places they live. Truth. Yeah, I saw that. He did have a really great segment. One people. What would you do if you were in a class of 100% whites besides learning? I'm white, but I don't feel comfortable without diversity, but I can handle it. Well, I will tell you, because I have an experience with that. When I was in 4th grade, we moved to the suburbs, and I left predominantly black schools and went to a school that was predominantly white. I think we only had about 4 black people in that school, and that's counting me, my sister, and maybe 2 or 3 other 2 kids, right? Might have been wrong, but it wasn't that many of us. And there was a perception. As a matter of fact, as a young boy, I got into a fight in a bathroom because a young white boy called me the N-word, right? Me and my other friend Baylor, one of the few other black kids who was in the school, we went in, they would let us go in 4 at a time, and he called me out of my name. And we got into a fight. And when the white teacher came in to break up the fight, he grabbed me and Baylor and threw us across the room. Even though, right, we hadn't instigated the situation. It's very hard to deal with that at a young age. But it also taught me a lesson. I thanks to my mother and thanks to others, I learned that people, they say these things because they're taught these things. Now, as a young man, you're not trying to hear that. You said something wrong to me, I'm putting my hands on you. But we have to get better. It starts with the one, right? It starts with the one. When they integrated the schools in the South and throughout the country, right, it was painful for some people. And there are documentaries, there are films where you can go and watch how crazy young kids, their parents were throwing bottles, beating men in the head, threatening little girls who were going to school. But we got past that. And we have schools in this country. They're still somewhat segregated, let's call them, be honest. But we also have people who feel comfortable working with each other, who have friends of many different cultures and backgrounds. So it comes down to, you have to be willing to push diversity and to accept it, and not shelter yourself or accept segregation or being isolated as a norm. Great verse, because it's true. Think about Trump supporters going to Biden's rally to protest Biden supporters. The thing is, in this country, guys, is that we have the right to protest, to be angry, and to say whatever, right? And we should never take that away. If a KKK, if a skinhead is out here screaming hate about other cultures, he is protected by the same laws that allow you to go out and protest and provide reason and understanding. Dr. King, I tell folks all the time, there are several books in my collection, and you will notice that when I have these books and I pull them up, I told you guys earlier, my desk is often a mess. But I keep books with me, readily available. I have an entire collection of Dr. King's books. Hold on one sec. And I encourage you guys and gals, women out here, to read these books, because, Pastor Razor, good friend of mine, he said, I'm always telling people to read books, but I have two books. One, I'm sorry, I was reaching in my book bag because one was in my book bag. This is Dr. King's last book, and you may have seen it if you watched this program. You've seen it before. Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos, Our Community. Great book. One of his last books. One of his least selling books, because it's a hard truth, before he was assassinated. But then there's this book, right? Why We Can't Wait. I would tell you to read these books and understand what he's saying about protest, about movement. Movement and protest work together, but they're not the same thing. I think we have lost our way of understanding that, right? Where we get into this idea that protest and movement are the same thing. The protest is something that comes because you're not being heard. And so you create a protest. When we look at the Montgomery bus boycott, that's what that was. They had gone to talk to city officials. They had gone to go sit with them. They told them what they wanted. They were ignored. And so they decided, now we're going to protest. We're not going to ride these buses. We're going to rally, right? We're going to march. But at the heart of it, every one of these other things are going to be to support the movement. And a lot of things out here right now are not movements. It's just protesting. I'm going to walk out of my school. I'm going to raise this, but I'm not making any functional demands. I'm not really saying what I want, right? I'm not trying to, and then with that comes some compromise. You got to give a little to get a little. And only through compromise do both parties feel that they're winning something. But if you just come out and say no, I'll give an example. Right now, we have the Dave Chappelle situation going on. Transgender, LGBTQ people in that community can be upset and feeling the way that they feel about what he did in his comedy show. But the better way of doing something is to make your demands. To say, because this is the thing, because I have a background, I understand film and television. You knew this was coming out. You knew it was going to happen. Sometimes we screen things before they happen. But you waited until it came out, so now you want the attention without the movement. I don't know if I'm clarifying that very cleverly, but you have to have other parts to support what you're doing. And then maybe there would be compromise. But you can't come in and kick the door down and tell people you're only going to do what I say. If you read any of those books I just showed you, Dr. King never did that. The SLC never did that. And they got criticized both by blacks and whites for not doing that. Who is this? Peter North, here, old adult film star. I cannot say I never privilege on the adult film stars. So this is somebody who's trolling and acting silly. I enjoy when people do this, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I feel that when they do that, they show us that there's some difference being made. Bravo. Amen. For what? You're sorry for. Oh, I know. No, they do it all the time. Oh, Mom, you must be talking about the school. Yeah, certain things I would not tell my mother. But it's experiences that you have to go through that teach you to be who you are. And I look at it that way. Don't get me wrong. My mother, I know my mother, so I know how that would have turned out. Is white people and black people if white people and black people have separate living spaces, bathrooms, and churches, does that mean that depending on different environments people grew up in, but they live a certain way? Like, for example, if a white person was in a white church, does that mean they praised a different guy, unlike the black person? It's kind of everywhere, Sean Anthony, but please forgive me if I don't understand what you're saying. But what I think that you're trying to say here is that if they worshiped and they lived in a different environment, separate from each other, that they learned to be different from each other. That is absolutely true. And that is what happened in the larger part of this country. We had people who learned to live and grow and be separate from each other. And unfortunately, what that did, so let's go a little deeper here quickly. Slavery was symbiotic, right? We have to understand that. When people live with each other in that certain way for the better part, 300, 400, call it whatever many years that you want to talk about, they live in an environment, they're raised, they grow, they're born, they die in that environment. The people who teach them, the people who feed them, the people around them, they all learn to live off of each other. That was integrated in a corrupt way, and it was symbiotic, right? So that they learned to depend on each other. When you look at post-Civil War, and when poor whites went back, and some wealthy went back, and they did not have the slaves to be there to work the land, and we get back into the idea of slaves, even though they were chattel, who were apprenticed, sent out to be blacksmiths, right? Clerks, to learn these skills to take care of the master, the white man's, the master, that family's business. Well, now they're free. And a lot of the complaint that came from people like Senator Calhoun and people like that who were rallying even before the Civil War was the idea that these people are now out here as savages. But the truth was, a lot of them felt they had lost a skilled worker. They had lost somebody. And now they didn't know how to do those things that those people were taught for generations. And on the other side, you had blacks who were being told all the time, this is what you should do, this is how you do it. They were whipped, beat, told, and they were given guidance. And they weren't given guidance anymore. They were free. And the idea of what freedom really meant. There's a great book, right? It's called Souls of Black Folks by W.B. Du Bois. I suggest that you read that book and get an understanding of what happened after the Civil War, those 30 years after, and what happened to both sides of that equation and how they had to learn. And then when they did try to come back together, how certain elements in the government split them back apart. We need to talk about that one day on one of these shows. The crowds at rallies are, as far as I can discern, are angry, misinformed people with preconceived biases. Maybe the fairness doctrine coming back. So, I think that people, I don't think in this country, I once wrote, and quoting Dr. King said that it would be okay if the Constitution, if the Declaration of Independence, if some of the documents that this country holds in such high esteem, right, had never promised freedom, had never promised liberty. You had men who themselves were slave owners and slave advocates, right, who got out there and said, give me liberty or give me death. That all men were created equal. Who wrote a constitution that gave rights and privileges to citizens. And Dr. King had said that had America never made that promise, had it never wrote it in its documents, had it never proclaimed that it was a bastion of freedom, then maybe we couldn't hold America to that promise, to the things that it aspires to be. But because America did make that promise, rather she meant it or she didn't, but because it is in our founding documents as a fundamental part of who we are supposed to be as a country, then we hold America to that promise, to those proclamations. And because we can hold America to that, we can go in and make changes to our Constitution on things that we have found to be not right, unlawful. Because we can add things to our laws to include and make sure that that inclusion is emphasized, and we can reference the other parts of our founding documents. So when I see people out here fighting, arguing, and screaming and doing all of these things in protest, I see people, as Tyson just said, who are misinformed, who did not really read, only listened and regurgitated what was put to them. Because when you actually pick up a document and you read it, that knowledge is coming to you. It doesn't matter when a person who hasn't read it comes and says, oh, you reading this book? Do you know he said this in this book? And you say, the heck he did. I never saw that. I read this 3 times. And they pull away from you because now they realize that their lunacy, their sophistry, their fallacy is not going to influence you. And we really need to get back to doing that, to making sure that ourselves, we learn for ourselves. What's one of the things I push for Erudition? Erudition is about you learning. I will give you books, tools. We will have these discussions. But in the end of the day, I'm going to give you a reference for you to grow your knowledge yourself. Because knowledge is not something that should be held and imprisoned and hidden. As W.B. Du Bois said, it should not be stuck behind a veil. We need to learn. Because in learning, we learn to be able to empathize, to understand, to see another side, to argue, to debate. But at the heart of all of that, we start to understand ourselves a little better and others. Thank you, my brother. So we have been on here, and you all are bringing questions. Hey, I appreciate it, because as I said at the beginning of the show today, as I was rushing in late, and we're going a little over because I started 15 minutes late. But hey, man, this was this has been a good session, because I really do believe that some of the questions that you all ask are so important, and such and so needed. Keep on, keep going, keep going, keep going. Anything else? Anything else? Nothing. Empty air. So I don't know if you all saw uh, recently there was a video, I think, of an African American gentleman, disabled, and he was being thrown on the ground and uh, being held down. Rather he committed a crime or he did not. But I happened to see that video the other day, and you know what, I'm going to get back to also, because I was supposed to show you all uh, Walter Wilcox, and I thought I had that picture available. But anyway, because we started this touching on uh, Blue Lives Matter and the idea of this bigoted understanding of um, how police operate, when in fact, um, what we have seen is that, it's not everybody. It's just certain people within any system and any administration and any force who go out and do very ignorant things to try to control others. Bullies. You all have seen some bully in school and different whatnots. But watching that video, I saw that thing that angers me, and I wanted to say this: when I see videos of police abuse or police over exaggeration of power, is just the idea of not being able to empathize with others. It bothers me when I see that, because what it does is it inspires people to go out and think that they can do things, and they can call the police, and they can use the law to manipulate and hurt others. Okay, Teddy asked the question. All right, Daniel. All right, all right, all right. Yeah, brother, he dragged him by the hair. That was crazy. That was insane. And that was a microaggression of dragging him by the hair. Then he threw his shoes at the car, right? After he did it. If you don't understand this idea of microaggression, what does that mean? When you have a bias or anger or whatever, and it pops out of you, we all have some kind of implicit bias. But when you do that, and I remember I was listening to Medgar Evers, the civil rights worker, his niece, and she was saying how with her, these microaggressions that happen, she works for a very large company, my company as a matter of fact, and she, the one of the companies I work for, and she went and they fly her first class. She is an executive, sits on the board, and when they always fly her first class, and she said they would say, "Hey, now boarding first class or whatever." And she said that whenever she would get up or she would go walk towards the kiosk to go out, the lady would, more than often, 9 times out of 10, they would say, "Man, we said first class." Microaggressions silly things that people say and do based on a bias that they have, that they've accepted in their lives, that bleeds over into their own everyday life. It's horrible. Teddy, could people that fly the Confederate flag be considered as xenophobic when they would frown upon the Nazi flag because it represents the evils done in Germany, while ignoring the evils behind the Confederate flag, as if Americans could do no wrong? Oh, good question. But I will say this. If you see Confederacy, right, and there is an underlying racism. I'm not saying everybody who flew the Confederate flag, because I was a kid, used to have Dukes of Hazzard, and the Confederate flag was sitting at the top. We didn't care. It was a cool car jumping and whatever, right? But when you use these flags or these ideas based on a racial dynamic, and that is your underlying idea, your xenophobia, right? And you're using those flags, they represent the same thing. So you're not frowning on that. As a matter of fact, you will see sometimes people are flying flags, the Confederate flag, the Nazi swastika on the same truck. Klansmen using the same thing. And you're like, this is lunacy. Malcolm X once said this, it's crazy. It's crazy. Racism is a mental issue, an accepted environmental mental issue that is taught. And all you got to do is accept it. Doesn't matter you white, black, yellow, brown, red, don't matter. You accept it as being superior. And you accept their lunacy. It's a culture. My father served 35 years lead detective in Las Vegas. He did brutalize people. He was a team called the Nasty Boys, counter drug. Still did fire a shot. It's true. I do believe it's culture, my brother. I do believe that we have told people that they can do. People don't typically do things and think things are okay unless they are showed it to be okay. I remember when that one guy was stopped. There was a military guy recently, about a couple of months ago, and the young cop that pulled him over was trying to be calm. But his supervisor, the older guy that got in and started screaming at that guy, get out. Then he freaking sprayed it in his face, and he did all of this stuff. Now, you could argue that the lieutenant or whatever should have got out of the truck or whatever. But that's not what stuck out to me in that video. What stuck out to me was the young guy who was like, man, all you got to do is just get out. All you got to do is just get out. And the guy kind of going off on the young cop to follow his lead. So you go into this madness together, right? Because the supervisor, the person that's over you, is telling you this is acceptable. This is what we do. We beat the hell out of these people. And I try to understand and give empathy to the idea of a cop. And I've said this before on here. Cops having to sit out there with the desk sergeant telling them that there are killers out there. There's dangerous people out there, giving them descriptions of people that they are stopping throughout the day that match that description. I get it. But at the same time, right, my son, my nephew, my cousin, my uncle, my father, all those people in those cars that you're stopping, that you're afraid of, that you're scared of. You don't want to admit that fear to yourself. You suppress it and you go out. So you walk up to the car with a gun and load it with your own implicit bias. And then when that person says, I'm not getting out of my car, all hell breaks loose. Because all of these different parts of that fly through you. And then you don't want to also understand that black, brown person of color is also afraid of the police from what they're taught and what they see that police do to people that look like them. And those two things meet together and boom. Unfortunately, some people die or have died. It's crazy. Some of that is a successful rebranding of the flag where people actually believe it It's about Southern heritage. Man, yeah. I think we once had this discussion, man, on the ship one time. It is. People are rebranding. And a lot of times you talk to them and they don't even really know. They say, man, it's a part of my heritage. And you talk to them and I didn't know that. I didn't know that about that flag. And then you give them, like me, I'm always going to give you a resource. And then they go read it and they come back. I've had sailors and people work for me come back and go, man, I didn't know that. Yeah. Because you're only getting, as I think my son said earlier, you're isolated in your little places. I thank God for my upbringing in the military that allowed me to interact with everybody. Oh, wow. Yeah, I know he doesn't say, but then you go different ways with that. That's compassion, man. If you don't have compassion for your fellow man, that's gonna hunt you. I think a lot of times with a lot of these officers who retire and they can't deal with different things that they've done, then that's me putting on my psychology hat. Is just the idea that cognitive dissonance that you've convinced yourself of for many years. Now you're sitting here and you're realizing, I got to deal with this. I'm now part of the civilian sector. This could happen here. I know you are. But I'm so happy, man, that you're out here, you're a teacher, you're teaching, and you're doing these things because I think that we try to help our young folks, and we try to give them the understanding, man. This ain't, and you've been all over the world, Tracy. Your thoughts and your impressions and what you've seen will forever affect those who your children and everybody that you have the opportunity to mentor and to teach. So I thank God that you're out here to do that. Well, we're at 57 minutes. I got on here, ladies and gentlemen, not knowing what I was going to talk about today. You have greatly assisted me, and we've had a great conversation. Erudition, sometimes I don't feel enough people watch Erudition. I've long since gotten over it. I know that it is shared. I do hear and see things in chat. I get people who come on and troll. But I am following the blessing and the gift that God gave me, that I believe God gave me. And I am trying really hard to present things to our society, to the little bit of niche society that I talk to encourage you to learn and to read and to grow, to learn Black history as American history, as world history, to share it, to have these discussions and these conversations about the things we've talked about over the last hour. I apologize for my tardiness getting in today, but I am so happy with the way that this session turned out. If you all will do me a favor and please share Erudition. There's nothing that we discuss on here to be embarrassed about, to not talk about. We need these conversations. We need this knowledge. Bring your knowledge. People on here bought their understanding and knowledge. Share your books that you read. Encourage. That's what I'm saying. But this has been another Thursday. This has been a great session. I thank you all, family, friends, loved ones, strangers, folks who just your first time ever watching this. Share Erudition. Join us every Thursday, 5 p.m. Mountain Time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll be here for you, and we hope that you'll be there for us. All right, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for participating as we learn together. You all have a blessed rest of your evening, and I will see you here again next week on the Erudition Network. Have a good one.